Hey, welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. This is now our 9th and last video micro lecture in this module number 6 on the topic of planning and strategy. And so, as you can see from this title slide, in this very last video, we're looking at the topic of wrapping it all together. Well, what if we really can take away from all of this and try to summarize it and give you some last parting thoughts to consider as we think about this topic of planning and strategy. We hope that after you finish this video, you'll be able to evaluate the importance of strategy implementation, along with some of its pitfalls, some of the things you really need to focus and concentrate on. How will this go for you? So, we will start out by just offering to you, there really are some very key considerations to the actual implementation of strategy. So the first is, as you are about moving from the thinking to the doing stage of actual execution of strategy, of your plans, one of the things to keep in mind, of course, is your very firm's structure, the firm's hierarchy, and how the organization has a pattern of working. That will have an enormous amount of impact on the effectiveness of actual plans, of actual execution. What does your company do well? What does your company historically excel at? And what have they historically struggled with? And that will have a great deal of bearing upon what you're able to pull off in terms of strategy implementation. Along those lines, one of the key elements of structure are your existing systems, the existing processes and procedures you already use. And quite frankly, if you're trying to change many of them at the same time, you are embarking upon a task which is fraught with danger and pitfall. People generally do not like change. They chafe against it. And if you are trying to change too many things too quickly, you are setting your strategy up for failure. In fact, Dr. Clayton Christensen will tell us in his fine and eminent book, The Innovator's Dilemma, that many times the existing processes and procedures that a company has established and used with great success may be the very things that keep you from innovating, from developing brand new and innovative solutions to the marketplace. So something to be very, very mindful of is, what does your company already do and what do people expect as normal? Touching on that, your people, the third thing to really consider as you go about implementing strategy, your people's skills, the knowledge of the technical aspects of your business's goods and services, and knowing how to apply this knowledge, as well as general work abilities. You really have to know your people well. You have to know what they're good at, what they excel at, how good they are at transferring knowledge throughout the organization, what is the current level of skill. And then that goes along with the next point, staffing. How good are you? What's your track record as an organization of your effectiveness at placing the right people in the right roles? Generally speaking, if you look long enough and you study the hiring well enough, you can get a sense for how well a track record that HR is building in terms of getting the right people in the right place. Is it a consistent thing that they're good at doing, or is it just a happy accident that it happened a couple of times? That will have a great deal to do with the success, the eventual success in implementing plans and strategy. And then what cannot be emphasized enough, what is the cohesiveness, the tightness, the stability of your corporate culture and shared values? Are the shared values and corporate culture the very glue that holds the company together? Or are they simply a plaque on the wall that nobody really pays attention to and everybody's in it for themselves? I personally have worked at organizations where some organizations where the former was true and some organizations where the latter was true, whenever it was just every man for himself. And that will have a great deal to do with whether or not strategy is implemented and executed with success or just falls by the wayside. These are all the kinds of things that you really do need to consider well and hard while you're in the midst of implementation. Now, some criticisms of strategic management. There are criticisms of this way of doing strategy, of doing a great deal of upfront planning and trying to consider and analyze well and then finally implementing. You can see here 3 points. Some critics argue strategic management is often all about planning with little emphasis placed on the actual execution. That is, by the way, very, very, very true. That's a very accurate criticism. Oftentimes, too much time and emphasis and importance is placed upon the thinking and planning in the boardroom, and then actually executing with your troops is an afterthought. And that can never be an afterthought, because that's where the actual work gets done or doesn't get done. The second bullet point, strategic management can be costly and time-consuming for the organizational members involved. Very true. There should be constraints placed on strategic planning, constraints in terms of time and resources. You cannot send a bunch of people away for an all-expense trip paid to Paris in order to handle your strategic management. You can't spend 9 months planning. You have to move, and you have to move with a purpose, and you have to move with a cost-effective purpose in order to get anything done. A very true criticism, by the way. Number 3, many charge that strategic management's preoccupation with a long-term time frame is unrealistic, given the short-term expectations of stockholders and other financial stakeholders. Well, there's a great deal of truth to this. I guess part of the question one of the ways I'd respond to this criticism is, to what degree do short-term expectations of stockholders and financial stakeholders act as the tail wagging the dog? How preoccupied are we with the short-term expectations of stockholders and other financial stakeholders? And should we be giving them that much focus and credence, or should we really be focused upon long-term success, stability, longevity, growth in the marketplace, and those kinds of things which tend to skew a bit long-term? I think both are true and both are important, that we need to balance our duties and responsibilities to our various stakeholders. And you can't emphasize the long term so much that you forget about the short term. Nevertheless, there are ways of doing things that meet both sets of expectations, both for the short term and the long term. Again, can be a valid criticism, just something that needs to be kept in mind. One of the things I would tell you, I've told you this in other lectures and other modules as well, that communication is key. To facilitate planning, goals and plans should be communicated to all members of the organization so they have an accurate idea of what the organization is trying to accomplish, and more importantly, how they fit in. In that sense, clear is kind. It would be difficult to imagine, if you're trying a new strategy, it would be hard to imagine how you could over-communicate that, because, quite frankly, people who are not involved in the original planning process will need help connecting the dots, how their daily work life connects with the overall strategic mission. You have to help them understand and tweeze out how each one of their roles will be modified and how that modification will contribute to the great big strategy. Very difficult to imagine or make the mistake of somehow over communicating this. You have to be clear with people. And finally, the last couple things to consider. One, good planning presumes that not everything will go according to your original plan, right? When was the last time someone came up with a to-do list in the morning and by the afternoon the whole thing was shot, right? Because stuff happens in real life. And therefore, we have to develop contingency plans, alternatives to the original plan, when things don't go completely exactly as you'd thought that they would. Good planners always have a plan B. And the absence of a plan B or a plan C really exposes someone who perhaps is very young and very rookie when it comes to planning. You have to anticipate what might happen and have contingency plans for that. One would also suggest, as you see there in the last bullet point, one of the most effective ways these days to accomplish strategic planning is to involve many employees somewhere in the process, to get their input, to get their response, to get their feedback about how things are really done in the front lines, how consumers and customers and users really react to things that you might be assuming or presuming, right? And the folks who deal closest to actual customers will have the best, most meaningful and accurate input on how the market will respond to particular changes. Therefore, it makes perfect sense. It's just good sense to get many employees involved in some way, shape, or form in the formation of strategic plans. Alrighty, we hope that this has been helpful as this closing word on the topic of strategy implementation. We hope that this, as it seals up this entire module of 9 micro lectures, gives you a taste, a flavor, an introduction to the topic of strategy and planning, and some of the things that in the real world you'll need to be conscious of, you'll need to consider as you look to implement strategy on behalf of your organization. Hope that's helpful. This, of course, is just an introduction to the topic. So much more could be said in this class. You'll see more of it in the textbook. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in the next module.